Well, good morning, everybody. How are you? It's good to be back on the Hill for the first time, as I understand, in 2 years. This is the first official event back on Parliament Hill. It's great to be with all of you. It's great to see you. On behalf of our co-host, General Dallaire, and MP Aaron O'Toole, I would like to thank all of you for being here this morning on the traditional lands, territories of the Algonquin. My name is Scott Maxwell. It's a pleasure to serve as your Master of Ceremonies this morning. I also have the distinguished honor of serving as the Executive Director of Wounded Warriors Canada, and we have been a co-sponsor of this event since its inception, incredibly, now 9 years ago. Sadly, we'll begin today's event on a somber note, and I ask that you join me in a moment of silence as we remember Officer Cadet Jack Hogard, Officer Cadet Andre Hansu, Officer Cadet Broden Murphy, and Officer Cadet Andre Salek. 4 young lives tragically lost far too soon. Thank you. This is, as I said, the 9th annual Sam Sharpe breakfast and the first official event on the Hill in 2 years. Given all that we've been through and all that seems to come our way through the pandemic, I can't think of a more important topic to gather together again to discuss than mental health. In saying that, we know this is one big country. We also know today, as much as ever before, that mental health knows no boundaries, no borders, no cities, no regions, no towns, no ages or demographics. Participation in the conversation is the first mover for care, and we're excited to have for the 2nd annual event a virtual audience that we're welcoming all of you wherever you're watching from today across the country. I would also like to pass along best wishes and regrets for our event co-host, General Dallaire. General Dallaire has been a national patron of Wounded Warriors Canada since our inception back in 2013, and I certainly will never forget the day sitting in his Senate office when he turned to me and said, "I'll join your organization on one fundamental condition. You make family an integral part of every program you develop from here on in." Having gone on, as some of these programs highlight on this little billiard behind me, from the COPE program, Couples Resiliency Program, Spousal Resiliency Program, Surviving Spouses Program, and our latest Warrior Kids Camp and virtual programs, his wisdom has informed our programming now for almost a decade and has led to hundreds of OSI-affected spouses and children each year receiving care that didn't exist prior to the creation of even this breakfast. It is in this context that we think about where we are today, how far we've come, how much farther we have to go, and what life could have been like, and indeed should have been like, for veterans like Colonel Sharpe in 1918. As everyone here knows and appreciates, mental health knows no boundaries, as I mentioned. For nearly a decade, this event has brought together parliamentarians from across party lines, CF members, first responders, family members, advocates, united in our shared mission to encourage informed discussion surrounding the mental health challenges faced by our veterans, first responders, and their families. Today is no different. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge some very special guests joining us today. The Honourable Anita Anand, Minister of National Defence. The Honourable Lawrence Macaulay, Minister of Veterans Affairs, and Associate Minister of National Defence. The Honourable Carolyn Bennett, Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, and Associate Minister of Health. Brenda Lukey, Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Major General Lise Bourillon, Acting Chief of Military Personnel. Brigadier General Chris Ayat, Chief of Staff, Army Strategy. Gregory Lick, Ombudsman for the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. Dr. David Pedler from the Canadian Institute for Military and Veterans Health Research. And finally, of course, no single organization, government agency, department will ever be the 100% solution when it comes to the complexities of mental health. We're pleased to be joined today by our friends and partners at the Mental Health Commission of Canada, Soldier On, Treble Victor, the Veterans Transition Network, True Patriot Love Foundation, who we work with each and every day, month and year to support those that we serve. We couldn't do it without all of you, so thank you very much. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce dear friend, neighbor, Aaron O'Toole. Aaron O'Toole has led a life of service. As we know, born in Montreal, he grew up as a middle-class kid in Bowmanville and Port Perry, Ontario. He enrolled in the Royal Canadian Air Force when he was 18 and attended the Royal Military College. After 12 years of service in uniform, Aaron retired from the military and spent the next decade working in the private sector as a corporate lawyer for 2 large Canadian law firms and for one of the world's largest consumer goods companies as their in-house counsel. Aaron has been elected to represent Durham 4 times, first in a 2012 by-election, then in 2015, 19, and 21. In government, he served as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade before becoming Minister of Veterans Affairs. After serving as the Conservative Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs for 2 years, Aaron was elected leader of Canada's Conservatives and became the leader of the official opposition from 2020 to 2022. Aaron is a graduate of the Royal Military College, Dalhousie Law School. Aaron O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Scott. Welcome and good morning, and thank you everyone for coming. Today is not only the first Sam Sharpe event in person in 2 years. Today is the first public event where Canadians can come to Parliament Hill and be part of their democracy in over 2 years. So it is great to see everyone this morning. Merci d'être ici en personne et virtuellement sur Zoom pour le 9e petit déjeuner de Sam Sharpe. On a fait beaucoup de progrès en ce qui concerne la santé mentale et la réduction de la stigmatisation durant les 9 ans. 9 years ago, when Romeo and I spoke about starting this event, the Canadian Armed Forces and the veterans community were going through a rash of suicides, almost a contagion. And on television, we weren't even talking about it responsibly. There was no message on how people that were affected by conversations could get help. There were no contrasting stories of veterans who found treatment with the help of their partner or their family or their comrades. There were no stories about treatment options and very few treatments. And when I checked on the status of Sam Sharpe, a parliamentarian who served at Vimy Ridge, was re-elected while fighting in France, a heroic Canadian, no mention of him on the Hill, not even a mention of Sam Sharpe on the website of the Great War History of Parliament. Today, thanks to courageous veterans telling their story, like Christian Lillington will today, thanks to Bell Let's Talk, to Wounded Warriors, to so many of the advocacy groups here, thanks to all of you, there is hope. There are treatment options. There is help. In 2018, the Royal Canadian Legion had Anita Samarinini, a mother of someone who died by suicide, Thomas Welsh. We're now responsibly talking about the invisible wounds of service. And in 2018, on the 100th anniversary of the passing of Sam Sharpe, Parliament voted unanimously to correct the omission and mark the service and sacrifice of Sam Sharpe alongside the other parliamentarian, George Baker, who died in the Great War. Grâce à l'honnêteté et le courage des anciens combattants comme Christian Lillington et des premiers répondants, il y a plus d'espoir pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes en difficulté. J'aimerais remercier nos familles militaires, les organisations à but non lucratif, les médias et nos politiciens pour avancer cette cause. Aujourd'hui, particulièrement, Ministre Annan, Ministre Macaulay et Ministre Bennett. I'd like to thank all parliamentarians for showing that we can come together, devoid of political stripe and color, to make sure important conversations are held on mental health. No one is alone, and there are treatment options. When I started this 9 years ago with Romeo, I was a new backbencher. The second annual I got to host as Minister of Veterans Affairs, a great job. Then 7 years of being not in the government side. I prefer the government side. And like everything, last year as leader of the opposition, I hosted this virtually through Zoom. So it is so nice to see a full room today. You get to say, yes, Aaron O'Toole is still kicking around here on Parliament Hill, still proud to be a member of Parliament, and still proud to stand beside and for our veterans. Hear, hear. And let me end with some words from Sam Sharpe himself. In his last message to his constituents, before he was evacuated from France with what they called at the time nervous shock. He said, quote, "Whether in Ottawa or whether in France, I have given my best, such as it is, to the service of my country. In every way possible, I have striven to maintain the honor of my country." And by being here today and being part of the Sam Sharpe story, you are honoring his service and sacrifice and showing that we will never give up. We will never stop fighting for all those who fight for us. Thank you and welcome again to the event.
This time it's my pleasure to introduce the Honourable Anita Anand, Minister of National Defence. The Honourable Anita Anand was first elected as a Member of Parliament for Oakville in 2019. She has previously served as Minister of Public Services and Procurement. As Minister of PSPC, Minister Anand oversaw the successful procurement of PPE and vaccines for Canada during the COVID-19 pandemic. Minister Anand has worked as a scholar, a lawyer, researcher. She's been a legal academic, including as Professor of Law at the University of Toronto, where she held the J.R. Kimber Chair in Investor Protection and Corporate Governance. She served as Associate Dean, was a member of the Governing Board of Massey College and Director of Policy and Research at the Capital Markets Research Institute, Rotman School of Management. She also taught law at Yale Law School, Queen's University, and Western University. Minister Anand holds a Bachelor of Arts, Political Studies from Queen's, Bachelor of Arts, Honours Jurisprudence from University of Oxford, Bachelor of Laws from Dalhousie University, and a Master of Laws from the University of Toronto. She was called to the Bar of Ontario in 1994. Minister Anand.
Well, thank you for that introduction, though rather lengthy, Scott. Really appreciate it, and thank you, Aaron. Thank you so much for co-founding this incredible initiative in partnership with retired Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire. I will say that your service, as well as General Dallaire's service, is commendable. And I thank you for founding and co-hosting this event and for inviting me here today. It's an honor to be here and to join you all and to see a full room again. So this is just wonderful all around. And to the both of you and Lieutenant Colonel Lillington and your beautiful spouse, And to all current and former members of the Canadian Armed Forces with us today, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your commitment to our country. Merci sincèrement pour votre service chaque jour pour notre pays. Now, the past number of days have been very difficult days for the Canadian Armed Forces in light of the tragedy that killed 4 Royal Military College cadets in Kingston last Friday. This is a very difficult time for the military community. And as we gather here today, our thoughts and our deep condolences are with their loved ones, their fellow cadets, and the entire RMC community. I have been in close touch with Commander Kurtz at RMC. She is offering support to the RMC community, as you can imagine, but the community is shaken. And this tragedy, I think as we feel it today, they are feeling it even more. And we must keep them in our thoughts and our prayers going forward. Now, I want to turn to a few brief remarks because it is such a privilege for me to join you here today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. I want to thank you so much for offering me this opportunity to speak at the 9th annual Sam Sharpe Breakfast. Et depuis près d'une décennie, cet événement nous permet de nous réunir et de discuter des défis de santé mentale auxquels sont confrontés de nombreux anciens combattants. And as we know, mental health challenges affect everyone and can affect anyone at any stage of life, including the Canadian Armed Forces personnel, veterans, and military families. And I agree that family must be at the center of everything we do. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Sharpe helped raise the 116th Battalion. He served, as MP O'Toole said, in some of the bloodiest battles of the First World War: Vimy, Avion, Passchendaele. As an MP and in Parliament and on the battlefield, Sharpe stepped up to serve his country, and in so doing, he earned the Distinguished Service Order. And not long after receiving this award, he was admitted to a hospital in Montreal, and in May 1918, he took his own life. We lost a respected soldier. We lost a public figure. We lost a heroic Canadian. And we will honor his memory today, each year at this breakfast, and when we ourselves are engaged in service. We have so much to learn from leaders of the past, and Sam Sharpe is one of those leaders. Now, what about today? What about today? We know that approximately 1/5 of Canadian veterans will experience a diagnosed mental health condition at some point in their life, including depression, anxiety, PTSD. And the last 2 years, I think as we all know, have been especially difficult for Canadian Armed Forces members, military families, and veterans. And this is something I have become very attuned to since I was appointed to be minister late last October. And our personnel have faced a relentless operational tempo as they have stepped up to respond to crisis after crisis in long-term care homes, during forest fires, during floods, for example, And the bottom line is that our Canadian Armed Forces step up every single day to serve this country. And our personnel deserve to be supported throughout and after their service at every step of the way. Et nous travaillons sans relâche pour créer une culture plus inclusive, plus diversifiée au sein de l'équipe de la défense, où les gens atteints de maladies mentales ne sont jamais jugés, stigmatisés ou rejetés. Now, this spring, we launched our Total Health and Wellness Strategy. And through this strategy, we are investing nearly $1 billion to enhance health and wellness programs for our Canadian Armed Forces members, for military families and civilian employees who are ill or injured, who face difficult family circumstances, or who are on a long deployment far from home. And through the Canadian Armed Forces Transition Group, CAF members who are transitioning to civilian life can also access personalized support and services to help them and their families as they enter new phases of their lives. But we must do more. We have to do more, because as we say, family and service are at the heart of everything we do. And we will continue on the road to support the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, nous avons encore beaucoup de travail à faire, bien sûr, pour offrir aux membres des forces armées canadiennes et aux vétérans le soutien dont ils ont besoin et qu'ils méritent. Pour beaucoup de trop de gens, la santé mentale est encore un sujet difficile à aborder et beaucoup n'ont toujours pas accès à des ressources adéquates pour favoriser leur bien-être. De nombreux vétérans souffrent encore en silence. But through initiatives like the Sam Sharpe Breakfast, we must continue to shine a light on the challenges that our veterans are facing, and we must continue to do everything we can to address them. Nobody should suffer in silence. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. Thank you for your tireless advocacy on behalf of veterans and the military community. Let's keep these nonpartisan conversations going today, during Mental Health Week, and throughout the year. All my very best to all of you. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Minister of Veterans Affairs, the Honourable Lawrence Macaulay. The Honourable Lawrence Macaulay was first elected as a Member of Parliament in November of 1988. He has proudly served the people of Cardigan for 33 years and is the longest-serving MP in the history of his home province of Prince Edward Island. Throughout his lengthy career, Minister Macaulay has served in a number of cabinet positions, including Solicitor General of Canada, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Labour, and since 2019 has been serving as the Minister of Veterans Affairs and the Associate Minister of National Defence. Having served as the Secretary of State for Veterans Affairs 25 years ago, Minister Macaulay believes there is no greater honour in Canadian public life than serving the veterans of this country who make our country what it is today. Minister.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm glad you used the short one. Anyhow, yes, I have been around a while, and it's certainly an honor and a pleasure to be here. I want to welcome all the distinguished guests, and Aaron O'Toole is absolutely correct. I think I do have the best job in government. It's an honor and a privilege to always to be able to speak at the cabinet table for our veterans. I started with that honor, and I'm back at this honor, and it's certainly a privilege. I also want to thank you so much for inviting me here today, and yes, it is great to be here. We're social beings, and it's great to be together. Great to meet people and to be able to sit and enjoy a meal together. I would also like to bring my respect for the 4 military cadets that paid the ultimate sacrifice, and it's so terrible and so hard for their families and so difficult for the military, indeed. When first elected to Parliament in 1908, Sam Sharpe chose to serve his country. But like many courageous Canadians, service to country took a very different turn when the First World War erupted 6 years later. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Sharpe helped raise the 116th Battalion and led his comrades to battles in places like Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele. He was a Canadian hero. But like so many others, he would fall victim to an invisible wound, a wound not yet understood by the military or by the people back in Canada. It was known then as shell shock or battle fatigue, and much better known now as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. We talk about Sam Sharpe today during Mental Health Week, because his story is an example of the extreme weight we ask our military people to bear. Physical pain, mental distress. Just like Sam Sharpe, hundreds of thousands of Canadian men and women put on the uniform, and sadly, too many of them face the internal battles. Our thinking and our treatment has come a long way since the First World War, but it is as important now as ever to remember that we cannot see every wound, and that not every combat debt comes on the battlefield. As Minister of Veterans Affairs, it is truly an honor to pay tribute to our remarkable heroes like Sam Sharpe, who selflessly served his country. But I know that expression of gratitude and thank you is not enough. We must provide the services and support for our veterans in need and when they need them, not just because it's our duty, but because it's the right thing to do. That is why we're continuing to invest in mental health for our brave members and veterans. Our focus is on ensuring that veterans, members of the RCMP, and their families who qualify can get the mental health support and services they need. One significant new change in this area just recently took effect. As of April the 1st, veterans who apply for a disability benefit for certain mental health conditions, as well as those who have already applied, qualify for immediate mental health treatment coverage. This will help ensure that we're supporting veterans' mental health when their disability benefit applications are being processed. Veterans can access up to 2 years of treatment for conditions like anxiety, depression, and trauma and stress-related disorders, no matter what the final decision is on their benefit request. This is really a positive change for veterans, but we know that we have a lot more work to do. And it's so important to tell stories about Sam Sharpe. It reminds us of the physical and mental burdens that so many of our veterans live with. And it is so true. I've been around for quite a while, and I do remember what it was like when we did not understand this. And it was awful, and what we thought. And we were so wrong. And how much work we got to do. And without a doubt, with occasions like this, and making sure we shine the light on these type of problems that our military people face, it is so important that we continue to make sure we provide the services they need. More importantly, though, it shows that folks have served our country, no matter what they're dealing with, that they're not alone. And it is so important that they understand that they're not alone. Because as you're fully aware, you can be alone in a big crowd with issues like we've just discussed here. It's an honor and a privilege to work for veterans. Thank you very much for having me here this morning. Thank you.
Pleasure now to introduce, thank you, Minister. It's a pleasure now to introduce a friend, veteran, who will come up to introduce our guest speaker, MP Alex Ruff. Alex enrolled in the Canadian Forces in June of 1993. He attended Royal Military College in Kingston. On graduation, he was commissioned as an infantry officer in the Royal Canadian Regiment. Throughout his 25-plus years, he served on 6 operational deployments, including the Quebec-Ontario Ice Storm, 2 peacekeeping tours in Bosnia, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and finally 1 tour in Baghdad, Iraq, where he was the Chief of Staff Deputy Director for the Ministerial Liaison Team to the Iraqi Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior. Alex retired from the military in early of 2019 as a colonel and was first elected as the Member of Parliament for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound in 2019 and subsequently re-elected in 2021. Alex.
Good morning, everyone. Bon matin, bonjour à tous. My thanks to Aaron, General Senator Dallaire, Wounded Warriors, Bell Let's Talk for organizing this and starting it 9 years ago. I have the honor this morning of introducing a good friend of mine, retired Lieutenant Colonel Christian Lillington. I'm not going to go through Christian's whole life. Read his book. First plug I'll do for Hit Parade State Zero. Because you can learn a lot about Christian, but you can learn a lot about soldiers, sailors, aircrew, military members in general, because there's so many similarities by reading his book. Christian joined the Canadian Armed Forces on the 24th of June, 1993. I don't know why he took so long. I mean, I joined the day sooner than he did, so he seemed to be a little slow on the uptick. He grew up in a small fishing community, Neils Harbor, on the northern tip of Cape Breton Highlands, and he was very similar lifestyle to, as I know, so many Canadians that joined the military. As he describes himself, he was always focused on being successful and was very highly competitive. Christian and I really got to know each other at early days at the Royal Military College in Kingston. Although we were in different squadrons, he was a 5-squadron fella, while I spent my 4 years in 2-squadron. Unfortunately, as already been alluded to, we lost 4 cadets at RMC this past weekend, including one of them was Broden Murphy, the son of another classmate of Christian and mine, Major Dave Murphy, and his wife Stephanie. So my condolences to all 4 families and all the friends in the college, and I know with some of the military personnel in attendance, General Burgon, Chris is a former staff and director there at the college. I know you guys are doing everything possible to help them, and Minister Anand, thanks so much for what you're doing to support that. Christian and I didn't always run in the same circles there at RMC, but we did get to know each other a bit at the start of the summer of 1994 during second language training. And c'est pendant la formation française Sandbox à Kingston que Christian et moi avons vraiment commencé à nous connaître. Je crois être sûr de pouvoir dire que nous avons tous les deux de mal à apprendre le français. La différence, c'est que j'ai encore des défis avec ça, alors que Christian était assez intelligent pour trouver une copine française et ensuite être muté à Valcartier. But who is Christian? Christian is one of the most intense, sarcastic, driven individuals, officers, leaders that I've known. Right from the get-go at military college, you know, with him running the music down at the hockey games, and you know, he was the center of attention, not just because I think he always wanted to feel that he was part of the team, and he was. But he talks about that quite a bit in his book as well, what drove him to succeed. After graduation, we were never really posted together, but we crossed paths many times, and I know that's why we've kept our friendship. He served in the Armored Corps, served with 3 different regiments during his time, and many different training establishments. I'm sure he'll talk about the unique challenges. It's in his book as well, about being sort of this unique Anglophone that went to Valcartier and the challenges that did, but the success it actually set him up down the road. Multiple operational deployments as well. He served in Northern Canada, the UN, with the UN in Eritrea, 2 tours in Kandahar, and he culminated commanding the 4th Canadian Division Training Center in Meaford in my riding. He's been commended numerous times, including a mention in dispatches. Most importantly, though, Christian's a father. He's got 4 wonderful kids with his previous partner, and he's a stepdad of 3 wonderful kids and a great husband, I know, to Kelly. And Kelly, thank you for everything that you do to support Christian. Veterans, military members cannot be successful without the incredible support of their partners and their family. Christian's book, after he retired in 2019, Parade State Zero, and then he's going to, I'm sure, get into the details of some of what he's trying to achieve, is really describing the cumulative impacts of mental health throughout, on veterans, throughout military personnel, and on their families as well. And it really is that. We talk about post-traumatic stress, we talk about operational stress injuries. However, so much of mental health, you don't know what's going to trigger it. And it comes from so much in life. It comes from your personal life, the stresses that you have there. It comes from events that you feel you're helpless and you can't do something about. I know one of the first events that Christian will refer to is Corporal Jim Mitchell's death, who is from Owen Sound in my riding. I've got to know Bob and Carol, his parents, super well, and it's something that I take great honor and privilege in helping commemorate one of those fallen heroes. Christian now, though, is dedicated in his post-military career to peer support work and his advocacy for veterans' mental health. He's seeking not only to share his experiences, but it's all to help those other serving members, veterans, police officers, emergency services, correction officers, medical professions, and countless others who suffer the effects of their commitment to their service and to this great country, and it's all about helping them in their health and well-being. Christian, I really believe this book is a phenomenal book. Everyone, welcome retired Lieutenant Colonel Christian Willington.
So am I on here now? Okay. Uh-oh. I'm going very high tech. Opa. Is that better? Okay. So I'm going high tech, which for me is something new. So I'm going to ask for your patience with that. So good morning, distinguished guests. My name is Christian Willington, as you've heard about me, and I'm a proud veteran. First of all, want to thank MP Alex Ruff for that very kind introduction, and for all the words that you said about us meeting. He has as much piss and vinegar now, I can tell you, as he had in 1993 when he was running laps around me in the point back down in Kingston. I too want to recognize the 4 officer cadets who passed this past Friday in the tragic accident in Fort Frederick. Jack, Andre, Broden, and Andreas. My heart goes out to their military family and friends, but also their families as they grieve this terrible tragedy. If there's one thing I've learned from my story is that proper grieving is extremely important as we move through these days and weeks, and trying to understand exactly what happened. I want to also thank the Honourable Aaron O'Toole and General Retired Romeo Dallaire for the invite today, but also for putting this exceptional event on and carrying it on in Sam Sharpe's honour, and also for your present and past service. Merci pour vos efforts d'éliminer le stigmate de la santé mentale. Events like this morning are steps towards making positive change. I'm convinced of this. I'm privileged to be in your company today, I truly am. Honored to be in our nation's capital. Today with me, I have the support of my beautiful wife and life partner, Kelly, who is a former police officer, in addition to many close friends out here seated as invited guests. It's certainly great to have you all here this morning. My goal today is not to tell you a sad story about my demise. It's for you to leave this briefing this morning or this breakfast with a few nuggets of wisdom as I've ascertained them, trying to get where you are today. Je vais faire mon mieux d'aller entre le français et l'anglais, mais ça fait plusieurs années que je n'ai pas fait une présentation dans les deux langues. D'abord, je vous demanderai un peu la patience avec mon français. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize right now that as we congregate for this breakfast, there are presently soldiers, veterans, first responders out there doing their business with the tools and the training that we've given them. And that's why it's so important that we keep them healthy and we do our best to keep them from being injured, but when they are, that we're able to react appropriately. Post-traumatic stress disorder is an injury. It is not a disease. It is not contagious. It is also not new. It's been known as hysterical attacks, war neurosis, nervous shock, shell shock, lack of moral fiber, combat fatigue, soldier's heart, war nerve, before it became PTSD in approximately 1980. Also in Canada, we refer to it as an operational stress injury. But my point with this is that right now, if someone leaned over to you at your table and told you they were having a heart attack, the entire room would burst into action. Someone would do scene management, another person would call 911, someone would administer CPR, and everyone would ensure the safety of that member. But if someone leaned over to you and told you they were having a panic attack, I'm not sure you would have the same reaction. What happens if someone has a heart attack is the same as the trauma that you can have from PTSD. No one is impervious to it, and both can be fatal. Not having a repeated exposure to it doesn't have to be from repeated exposure and can come from a singular event, but when it is repeated exposure, it is complex trauma. Complex trauma is something that rocks your core, shocks your system, and makes you question what you understand to be true. So PTSD is an injury. So let me start with a few wave tops from my book, just to put in perspective why I'm with you today. J'ai commencé ma carrière quand j'ai gradué du collège militaire en 1997 comme un officier dans le corps blindé. J'étais muté à Valcartier comme un anglophone très dur. J'étais vraiment un bloke, comme ils disent. Mais je n'avais pas le choix d'apprendre le français, puis c'est ça que j'ai fait. When I got to Valcartier, I missed my chance to go to the Balkans, and I was extremely eager to do that. But at the time, the Canadian forces were sort of maneuvering into more United Nations type missions. And as was alluded to earlier, I was afforded the opportunity in 2001 to go to Eritrea, which is a country just north of Ethiopia in the Eastern Horn. Something that stands out to me, other than being a very young, energetic captain, very competitive and wanting to solve all the world's problems, was that I was there for 9/11. And the way I found out was that through a painstaking wait of a dot matrix printer, excruciating and confusing as it came out. From then, I realized that the world had changed, and I wanted to be part of making it a better place. When I got back into Canada, I was immersed into the training system, as alluded to, and I spent the majority of my career not on operations in the training system as an instructor, staff officer, and eventually as a commandant. I was promoted quite young to major at the age of 30 and went on an acting while so employed task to Afghanistan as the lead planner for Task Force 306 in 2006. It was a chaotic and bloody tour which saw such historical battles like Operation Medusa, and there are veterans from that battle here today. But what hit home for me was in October of 2006 when I went in the Operations Center as a staff officer inside the wire, and I saw the names of two of my friends on the board, Corporal Jim Mitchell and Sergeant Craig Gillum, vital signs absent. That meant they were dead. I translated my grief into work. I took my 16-hour days and made them 22-hour days. When I came back in 2007, the only thing I wanted to do was go back in a combat role, and I was afforded that opportunity in 2010. Training for tour was long and seemed painful and tedious. 2 weeks before we deployed, on the 17th of April in 2010, one of my Master Corporals, Master Corporal Cliff Thompson, was killed in a vehicle accident. This was a stark reminder of the fragility of our mortality for our troops, but this would not be our last. The first night when we arrived in Kandahar on the 3rd of April, we said goodbye to P.O. Douglas Blake, an IED operator from our tour, who died near Spiro-Angar. So my troops had to experience putting one of their favorite Master Corporals to ground with his family in Sarnia. Fast forward 2 weeks, and they were saying goodbye to one of their first on our tour. The following weeks, which led were very chaotic. I lost a friend and a mentor in Colonel Jeff Parker 2 weeks later, early in Kabul, when his vehicle was hit by a vehicle-borne IED. Just a week later, during a tactical operation moving my headquarters from one location to another, my driver, Trooper Larry Rudd, was killed when our vehicle hit an IED. I had just debarked from the vehicle 45 minutes prior to conduct liaison with a peer of mine, and was devastated to hear the news over the radio. Losing Larry really shocked and rocked my squadron, and the naivety that we had that we were there just to maintain stability was lost. We knew it was combat. Larry was the glue that held the squadron together. 280 pounds, 6'4", he was a machine. Less than a month later, a sergeant sapper who worked very closely with us in our training, Sergeant Jimmy McNeil, died near Nakani trying to disarm an IED. Just 1 week after that, 2 of our medics, Master Corporal Crystal Giesebrecht and Private Andrew Miller, burned alive within the OP position that we were defending while responding to an incident with the Quick Reaction Force. Less than 2 months on the ground, we lost 6 souls in 4 separate attacks, one before we even left home. April to August were full-on crazy for me and the squadron. I forced myself to lean into my mission, and I ignored my health. Given advice to carry on and suck it up and lead from the front is what I was doing. Halfway through my tour, while transiting between locations on a Chinook helicopter, it was shot down on the 5th of August 2010 by an RPG. It was the first time a Canadian helicopter had been shot down where everyone survived. Had it not been for the actions of Captain Wild Bill Fielding, the aircraft captain, we would not have survived that crash. A sobering thought is almost a year to the day a U.S. Chinook was shot down in the same spot and 37 U.S. Marines perished. Coming home with my subunit, it was dispersed within the regiment, and I was very angry. I was looking for a fight. I was brash, I was bold, and I couldn't understand my emotions. I proceeded to Toronto on my staff officer course, and after 2 weeks of getting there, I received news that my driver, who replaced Larry Rudd for 6 months in Afghanistan, Corporal Brendan Shepard, had taken his life in his storage unit in Petawawa, Ontario. I felt partially responsible for Brandon's death because I never saw the signs in his 7 months that we spent in a very intimate and close contact in combat. I increased my drinking and risky behaviors, and the military machine was moving on, and I had to be on it. I was off to Ottawa to cut my teeth as a senior major and junior lieutenant colonel. The incident that pushed me into depression was when I lost my mother on her birthday on the 24th of June, 2013. This is something I expect to happen, so just give me a sec. She passed very quickly from cancer on her birthday. I turned to alcohol and Percocet to self-medicate. What I haven't mentioned to date, and is very important to my journey, is that at this time I had had 4 children in a span of 10 years with my ex-wife. I made work more important than my family. All I wanted to do was become a commanding officer at this point, and I was afforded that opportunity in 2015 in a small base, as mentioned, near Meaford, Ontario, called the 4th Canadian Division Training Centre. I knew that if I slowed down and asked for help, that I would be left behind. My days as CO were very long and led to 0 sleep. I was fueled on anger, fitness, and chewing tobacco. The way I was coping with my injury disrupted my ability to be a father and a role model. The incident that made my bucket overflow was in August of 2016, when a young man from my hometown of 1,000 people came to my base for his basic infantry training. Private Andrew Fitzgerald took his own life on the day of his graduation on the 13th of August 2016. My entire unit spent 6 days in Owen Sound looking for him before finding him in Georgian Bay. As mentioned by Alex earlier, the cumulative loss over a decade became crippling. I sought the advice of my physician's assistant on base, who was a personal friend, and he told me that I needed intense therapy. I pleaded with my general to attend a 2-month program at Homewood in Guelph, Ontario. My chain of command were not comfortable with my issues, and I almost felt it was like a loss of confidence in my abilities. Despite never having faltered or taken a knee, I felt like they were starting to lose faith in me and had to plead to stay in command when I returned. The fly in the ointment for me when I was in Homewood in February of 2017 was that my troops were told that I was away on training. My staff were embarrassed for me and the institution. For their own comfort level and to protect me, a story was created, which made me very uncomfortable. When I came back from Homewood on the 7th of April 2017, I asked my senior soldier, our RSM, Eric Prue, to assemble the entire unit of about 500 people, civilians and military. I disclosed my truths and my weaknesses with my injury as I saw them at that point in time. I wanted to break the stigma as it existed and felt that if I wanted them to be vulnerable with me, I had to be vulnerable with them. I wanted the unit's support for me to be in my remaining 3 months of command. I was not so concerned with what my chain of command above me thought, because it was more important for me, for them to see my struggles so that they too could come forward. But now that you've heard all about my losses and the close calls that I've had, the closest I've actually come to death is at my own hand in my own home in July of 2017. But as close as I was to death in that Chinook, with Bill Fielding landing that helicopter, it was a fellow vet who came to my aid, Johnny O'Neill, at 11 o'clock at night. He is the reason I'm with you today. Akin to Sam Sharpe, I want to quote him when he said, "It is awful to contempt the misery and suffering in this old world, and were I to allow myself to ponder over what I have seen and what I have suffered through the loss of the bravest and best in the world, I would soon become absolutely incapable of carrying on." Sam Sharpe was a hero. Not only was he the same rank, age, and fought in combat, but he cared deeply for his subordinates and carried the guilt of loss of too many good souls. We can't expect our people to see and experience an unlimited amount of trauma and not be affected by it. Sam Sharpe was a resilient man. Everyone has a limit, and it's no easier to carry on now than it was 105 years later. Suicides are epidemic now. There's no statistic or board of inquiry which will tell me otherwise. 700,000 people take their life in the world yearly, and more attempt it. In Canada alone, 11 people take their lives daily. In 2018, 9 police officers in Ontario took their lives several years after Road to Mental Readiness was launched. The Chief Coroner of Ontario himself stated in October of 2019 that the broken toy culture must change. People need to be allowed to seek help without it being a career ender. Some factors affecting suicide, one of the growing issues in our profession today is sanctuary trauma. Sanctuary trauma happens when a person who has encountered trauma go to their chain of command expecting support, reassurance, safety, and discretion, but instead incur more trauma. This can come in the form of shaming, gaslighting, workplace mobbing, removal from primary duties affecting sense of self-worth, amongst other things. But another barrier for me to recovery in PTSD, which people engage in frequently, is what I call trauma comparison. Simply put, it is toxic. It's the "I've been through worse, but I'm not sick" mentality. Exposure to the same incident may result in a different reaction. Like secondhand smoke and getting cancer, it's not a guarantee, but repeated exposure increases the odds. It's the outside the wire versus the inside the wire. I blew up this many times, you never saw an IED. I was a clerk, I was an infantry soldier. I was a police dispatcher, I was a police person. There's no regard for personal stress or life dynamics. It is irrelevant. It stops people from getting help because people don't feel like they belong or their situation is worse enough. I experienced this just recently when my wife and I were able to attend a wonderful program for equine therapy called Can Praxis in Alberta. The days and weeks leading up to it, I had enormous anxiety about who I would meet there and whether or not my trauma would outweigh their trauma, just so that I could feel like I belonged. The other thing that dawned on me when I was there for this program is that it was the first time in 6 years of intensive therapy that I was afforded the opportunity to go with my wife, as part of my blue circle, as I call it in my book, to do some sort of treatment. And it was marvelous. And it should have been done years and years prior. But what we don't understand, and I think it's something that I've heard earlier today but makes me feel very good, is that families are at the center of recovery. My current family has been fundamental to my recovery, and my spouse, as mentioned, is the center of my blue circle. But families see the ugly aspects of this injury. Compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, high rates of divorce are real things. Most of our grandparents who fought in World War II in Korea and lived their lives with undiagnosed trauma. Some families have normalized violence, but with treatment and awareness, we can break the cycle of violence. When I say violence, I don't just mean physical violence. That's where your mind goes. I'm talking about psychological and emotional abuse. If you don't have a family or your family just doesn't understand, something that's really helped me in my struggle and recovery has been peer support. So why is the book important? I wrote the book for very selfish reasons. I'm not going to lie to you. I wanted my children and my family to have a record of my life and my struggles and my crazy, as I call it. But when I started my treatment in 2016, I just wanted to help one person. But since I released the book in January of 2022, dozens and dozens have reached out, which screamed to me the need for more awareness with mental health and more action. I'm taking the proceeds from the book to create bursaries in the name of fallen soldiers and first responders in high schools across Canada, and have created one such bursary to date for Andrew Fitzgerald back home in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. The intent is to carry on their legacy and help with the grieving process, and it has done both of those things for me today. In summary, if you could walk away with a few nuggets of wisdom, as I mentioned earlier, it would be the following points. The institution's response to a person in need can add to that person's trauma. Let me be clear. When I say institution, I mean you. How you respond to mental health injuries can in and of itself be traumatic for the person in need. It is a human response, not a template or policy. The generations behind us are on a large scale much more educated and well-connected. They will not accept the suck-it-up mentality. We have to be prepared for this inevitability. We also have to lean on peer support, and we have to be comfortable being vulnerable with our people the way they are vulnerable with us. The second point I would make is that leadership affects culture and culture affects behavior. The broken toy culture needs to change. 105 years later, after Sam Sharpe's tragic death, we still associate shame, failure, and weakness with mental health. We have not yet shifted the culture to prevent such tragedies. Suicides are still a major problem in our professions. Even 105 years later, we are still not comfortable taking the time to treat these injuries and would rather tell our troops that we are away on training than tell them that we are away getting treatment. My third point is that we do not lack in awareness. I've heard that today. I've heard so many great things from all the presenters, and even in my discussions before we even started today. But there's no protocol for mental health response. If what we were doing worked, we would not have the problems we do with suicides, burnouts, and early medical retirements. Until we rush to the aid of someone in a mental health crisis the same way we do to someone that needs CPR, there is still more work to be done. Mental health first aid needs to be as important as CPR. Not once in my 26-year career did I have to administer CPR, but when I was commanding officer, there wasn't a day that I didn't have to manage a mental health crisis with one of my students. Hindsight is 20/20. If anything, today, when you leave here, please live vicariously through me. If I could go back now and be the leader, equipped with the knowledge I have, I would be infinitely more effective and empathetic. Know your subordinates and promote their welfare starts with you. Start with self-care by putting on that oxygen mask first. Recognize the sounds of your own signs of mental health struggles, the overworking, heavy drinking, poor physical health, risky behavior, extramarital affairs, polysubstance abuse, the list goes on. Equip yourself with resources to administer help so you too can help those who come to you. The last point has been mentioned earlier, and it warms my heart that it's been mentioned so many times, but it's families. Families need support and need to be part of the safety and recovery plans. It's equally important to the individual with PTSD that the family understand their struggles. We need to break the cycle of violence. I want to come to a quote that came from my master's thesis in 2012. It's by no means profound, but I find it to be factual. It says, "No matter how strong or prepared a soldier is for battle, even warriors can break." Even the most resilient human being can reach a point where they cannot take more trauma. Let me rephrase that for the group here today. No matter how strong or prepared, no matter how many chevrons, maple leafs, or crowns you have on your shoulder, we are all soldiers first. So what is it like to be me now? I am injured, I am not broken. I started a website called warriorsforlife.ca with the intent to help my fellow veterans, first responders, and their families navigate PTSD, because there's so much out there, so much good out there, and it's supposed to be a portal and a one-stop shop. It is still a work in progress, and it's something I'm very proud of. But as Aaron said in the recent podcast that we recorded, I've now refocused my efforts to helping other veterans, and somewhat back in service, albeit not on the parade square. I could be referred to right now as Parade State 1. I could not ask for anything more at this stage of my life, because when an injured warrior receives the help they need, there is a post-PTSD growth. Thank you for being on my journey. Merci.
Christian, thank you for that incredible, powerful, moving comments, not a speech, comments about your life, and for sharing that with us all, paying it forward, as we like to say. And it obviously struck me a comment. You spoke a lot about leadership, and it was something in closing the breakfast this morning that General Dallaire said to me many years ago when we weren't having conversations like this. And he said, Scott, you know, mental health is as much a leadership issue as it is a healthcare issue. I really didn't know really what he was referring to, other than just having read his book and what he received coming back on the tarmac when being asked what it was like to play with the elephants coming home from Rwanda. You can imagine. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Aaron. Each and every one of you in this room are leaders in your own networks, in your own lives, in your own professions, helping us as a country, as a community, pay your experiences forward to make tomorrow better than today. Thank you so much for attending. It's an honor to be here with you. Christian's going to be signing some books as we wrap up the breakfast this morning. Thanks again for making this day as special as it was for me, and I hope it was for you. Thank you.